Coming up, the Brooklyn Nets fall to the Boston Celtics, but more importantly, Cam Thomas, hamstrings, down for the remainder of the season. What does it mean in the short and long term for the young guard star in Brooklyn? We dive in coming up next.
You are Locked On Nets, your daily Brooklyn Nets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Yes, my friends, it is the Locked On Nets podcast, right here on the Locked On Podcast Network. It's your team, the Brooklyn Nets, every single day. He's Doug Norrie. I'm Adam Marbeck. We thank you, as always, for making us your first listen of the day. We are 100% free on all those great platforms. And let you know, today's episode is brought to you by Monarch Money. Take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use code LOCKEDONNBA at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. And Doug, sure, the Nets lost to the Boston Celtics. They're in the 5th spot for the tank. That's all great. But the bigger news over the weekend is that Cam Thomas, with his 3rd hamstring injury of the season, is going to be shut down for the remainder of the year.
Yeah, it looked like he tweaked his hamstring in the final play of the game against the Bulls, sat out against the Celtics. But before before that game even started, when the injury report came out, per Nets PR, they had announced that he had tweaked his hamstring, and it was mostly that the recovery time was going to push too far up into like close to the end of the season. And they were like, well, at that point, they're not going to the playoffs, anything like that. They'll probably be you would expect to be fully in the tank in those final few games of the year, where they're just going to try to probably just play some guys and probably unabashedly tank would be my guess. And so we get a situation where Cam Thomas goes into the offseason, not going to play these final 18 games of the season. And it's going to be really interesting. Huge bummer, because before we even get to like what might happen with him, he had for sure just like kind of turned this corner into like a different style of player before this injury. He was averaging close to 6 assists per game over the last 5. He was pass first, and it will be and it was just we were like really excited to see like sort of like what this or a new version of him could be over the final stretch of the season leading into a contract year. And now it's not going to happen. And there's concerns about injuries, and there's concerns about his style. I mean, there's a lot of stuff here, but overall just a massive bummer to lose him.
Yeah, had 10 assists in that game against Chicago, which was, as you say, probably the peak of this run since returning from the injury. Had 7 assists against the Golden State Warriors, had 6 against the Spurs going back to the beginning of the month. Had a couple where it was just 3, and had his normal kind of volume and like that. But to have even, you look at it in totality, 3 out of 5 games where you're talking about a guy, and it's less about the stats, because we said this before too, that was just looking to be pass first, looking to set up teammates, reading the defenses properly, and making the right plays. It is a massive bummer, because we just did this, 2 episodes ago, where it was, hey, how excited are we going to be if we get the rest of this season? If we turn back and it was going to be close to 40 games of the year, we probably would have said 20 or 25 of them after Cam Thomas turned this corner when it comes to his offensive game. How significant would that be going into the offseason and going into next year, going into the draft? How do you think about constructing your roster? I guess the high-level question is, for everything the way that Jordi Fernandez has talked about it, setting a new standard, Cam Thomas seems to have responded in a different way than he has to coaches in the past for Brooklyn. Do we think that this little sample size here, and probably everything that's going on behind the scenes too, is enough? Like, is Brooklyn front office sit back and go, great, like we know what we're going to have with him going forward? Or is it, okay, maybe, but is that a guarantee when we get into next season and we bring in another rookie draft class? I think this is pretty significant, maybe not from the Nets side of things. I think there's a significant impact from the Cam Thomas side of things going into this offseason.
It hurts him bad, I think. I think it hurts him pretty significantly heading into a year where he's, looking to get really paid. I mean, remember, he was a late round draft pick. He hasn't made sort of generational money. He's made good money, but he hasn't made generational NBA money yet. And so this is easily the most important stop on his career arc right now, like this restricted free agency. And I think the decision tree here is pretty wide around what can happen. And I think the decision tree, or whatever that would be, would have been a little easier to grasp had we, like you said, played these final 15 games, played 15 more games of the year. We got 40 games under his belt. You got a half a season. Maybe the style of play is looking different, and you can really sort of hang your hat on this not going to shoot all the time guy and like offensive facilitator guy who's making like sort of no look passes in the paint to guys that are back cutting, right? Like what he did in that Chicago game, things that he just hadn't really done with any volume before or really at all. And now it's going to be a situation where I hate that it's like this, but like we said it. I don't know if we said this all season long, but we said it at the beginning. We said, whatever the Cam Thomas story at the beginning of this year is, there's not going to be any more clarity at the end. I was actually willing to start pivoting that take.
Yeah.
Right. Because
end of the season here, if he's going to do this for another 15, 20 games, then we'll actually have a different conversation. But
totally, because I was like willing to be like, oh, maybe maybe we're going to be wrong here. Like that he's playing different, like stylistically it's different. I think maybe we can make some more definitive statements around like sort of what his high end ceiling is. And now that's just not going to happen. And so, I guess maybe we could talk about a little after break in a little bit here. Well, actually, I'll just say it now. So qualifying offer wise, because he didn't start enough games this year, he doesn't get to an 8.7 minimum qualifying offer. Like, so he gets screwed there just to start. Like I don't think he's going to, the base level qualifying offer is around 6 million. It's going to be more than that. Okay. So I don't think like he's at risk there, but it's funny. Like even the base level QO for him falls because of the injuries this year. So it already starts on this weird path where it's like already we start with a lower number simply because he hasn't been able to start enough games. And it's just the story of his career. The story of his career has been uncertainty. That's really what it is. Uncertainty and disagreement. Like that's been the whole entire story.
Yeah. And you mentioned just earlier, for clarification, as a rookie contract, he signed a 4-year, $10.45 million contract when he came in the league. So as you say, I mean, listen, for you and me,
okay, he's made great money. Yeah, of course.
$10 million would be great. But by NBA standards and about like life-changing money, as you talk about with these big contracts, like this is going to be, or should be, or could have been the life-changing contract this offseason that he's going to get. That's why coming up here in a second, I think that there's a really interesting potential here for how Brooklyn chooses to approach this offseason, like they maybe did with a Nick Claxton, or do they go the other route and will Cam Thomas push back on how the organization wants to treat him in a big offseason? We'll do that here coming up in just one moment.
All right, before we get to that, tell you about our friends over at DoorDash. NBA fans, get ready. They swoosh you save thanks to Dash Pass. Every time a player drops 50 or more points in a game, you score a huge deal the next day. It's super simple. Any player scores 50 or more in a game during the 24-25 regular season, Dash Pass members get 50% off and order up to $10 off the next day from noon to midnight. It's a little bummer because the one guy who on the Nets who probably could have pulled this off was Cam Thomas. I don't think there's going to be any other 50-point scorers in the Nets boom, but that's not going to matter for you because it's across the entire NBA. So just start watching box scores from every other game. You get that game day feast going. You get those late night cravings taken care of. You get lunch on the go, $0 delivery fees. You sign up for Dash Pass, be ready to save when any player scores 50 or more in a game. Dash Pass members get 50% off that order. The next day up to $10 off. Use promo code NBA50 from noon to midnight after a 50-point game on eligible orders of participating merchants. Must have an active Dash Pass account. Terms apply. Visit DoorDash to learn more. And when you're done with that, head on over to our friends over on FanDuel. March Madness, it's here, folks. FanDuel's giving you the chance to get in on the action like never before. Right now, new customers get $200 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. $200 extra bucks to use in everything from those buzzer beaters. Maybe some Cinderella stories coming up this week. I think we're going to have some. Even who's cutting down the nets, it's a little bit ways away. FanDuel's got you covered all the way through. You got your eye on a few underdogs this year and make the most of it. Over with FanDuel, you visit FanDuel.com. You get in on that college hoops action. You get $200 in bonus bets when that first $5 bet wins over at FanDuel.com all tournament long.
All right, so as we continue today's Locked On Nets episode, talking about Cam Thomas, the hamstring injury, third of the season. If he had a fourth or fifth hamstring, I'm sure he would have injured those too. But we talk about what's going to happen this offseason for him, and this is where I think it gets, I'll say interesting, not tricky, because I mentioned Nick Claxton there. There was not necessarily a sense that some other team out there was going to give him a $100 million contract, but the Nets gave it to him. And it seemed to be symbolic of, we drafted you, we like you, we've developed you, we don't want you to go anywhere. It's descending money, so there's options, and we talked about that too with him. When it comes to Cam Thomas, I am fascinated. If Brooklyn does not approach this offseason in a somewhat similar way, while scaled, right, as they did with Nick Claxton, I see a world where Cam Thomas is going to be, and his agents are going to be hunting hard to find another team that wants to give that bigger offer, that maybe wants to take a risk on him. Because if we're talking about that lower QO, as you mentioned, closer to 6 million than to 8.5 million, I just think that Cam Thomas is probably at the point where he feels like he is worth far more than what that restricted free agent qualifying offer is, and is worth even more than that. You know what I mean? Like, I wonder how both sides look at this, because Brooklyn could say, yeah, you've been hurt. Like, we like where you're headed, but these injuries are, a concern, certainly. Let's get you back on the books for a reasonable number and see what happens. But that would be then going into the 5th, 6th, 7th year of, I don't know. How does the organization feel about Cam Thomas rather than feeling secure as a cornerstone piece for the new regime?
Yeah, so I'll say one thing that's different about the Claxton situation, and maybe this is just rewriting history. I don't think it is. Around this time last year, when we knew when we knew he was headed into a contract year, Cam Johnson too, there was like significant chatter that the Nets were interested, that they wanted to bring him back. Like we that there were other teams that maybe were interested. Just like maybe the Pistons. Like there was other word of like these little things floated up. Maybe the Pistons will get it on. Like these things floated in and around. And it was like, it was a discussion of how high are the Nets willing to go. Like that was the discussion. This is very different. Like those discussions
and they were like, and the idea, sorry not to cut you off, was the Nets are going to cut this off at the pass, and we're going to give these guys their contracts early. We're not going to get into these waters of other teams being involved. Yeah,
exactly. The rhetoric was completely different. It was, there's a market. These guys are important to us. We're going to do it. And our conversations were like, hey, how much is too much when you feel like someone's your boy? Like that was really what we kind of discussed. It was like, and maybe with some of these contracts they did that. I'm not sure, but it was for sure like there was no risk of whether or not the Nets were going to like low cut it, right? It was like, maybe if enough teams come calling, then they have to really kind of bump the number up, or they just kind of negotiate with themselves, it seemed like, and they signed these guys to like numbers that it didn't seem like any other team would pay. That was what happened with like Claxton and Cam Johnson. There's none of that talk. That doesn't exist. We have not heard a single sliver of anything like that with Cam Thomas. We haven't heard it that other teams are going to be in the mix. Other teams are going to come over the top with some, with offer sheets. None of that has happened. And we haven't heard from the Nets that they're like, he's important to our future. Like, this is a building block. Nothing like that has ever come out, ever. Like, not even close to it. And so I think that's meaningful. I sometimes don't think like the little pieces of chatter are anything more than chatter sometimes. I think people just do a lot of talking in this stuff, and NBA has a lot of dead time. And so there's a lot of like time. Like we do a podcast every day about a team that completely stinks. So we're part of this. But with all of that dead time, there's never been a single shred of evidence that the Nets see this as like some kind of long-term deal. And I think the absence of clarity provides some clarity, right? Like and the clarity is they're not that into it, right? Or they're not that into it if it's expensive. And I mean, dude, we both go on Twitter a lot. Twitter's good for some things, terrible for other things. But one thing I think it is good for is sometimes sort of crowdsourcing opinions, right? And I saw a couple threads that were like trying to guess at his contract status, like what would happen. Dude, it was all over the place. Over the place with like huge numbers, nothing numbers. Like, I think that just speaks to it too, is that I'm going forever here, but like, you know what I mean? Like there's just so much uncertainty here. And I think when there's uncertainty, the number's low. You know, like I think when there's uncertainty, the number's low. It doesn't go. It doesn't come over the top.
No, and I agree with you. And this is the big difference here for him, right? So when we think about the Brooklyn Nets going into next season, where they'll only have Claxton for 25, they'll have Johnson for 20. That's it. Everybody else is under $4 million. Noah Clowney is the next highest paid on the books player at $3.4 million. Now they're going to have the rookie class, and they're going to make somewhere between $4 and $10 million, something in that range with the spectrum that they're going to live on here. So okay, you'll add some more onto the books. This is where I think it's so fascinating, because the Nets can afford to do whatever they want. If the Nets turn around, so there was a couple articles, like SNY had a couple up. I think there was one over on Bleacher Report as well, when they talked about like the market value and saying, well, his market value could be somewhere getting close to the $20 million range. But the qualifying offer was close to 9, but then would drop to 6 now that he isn't going to play the remainder of the season. So, what is the difference there? If you're the Brooklyn Nets and you say, you've had some injuries, we do like you, we think you can continue to develop, especially under Jordi Fernandez now, here is a $14 million AAV. Like, does that number and close to $60 million, maybe over a 4-year deal, to Cam Thomas be like, hey, that's life-changing money? That's also security. Or when we can talk about this coming up here, it's like, is any other team, how far would any other team be willing to go to say, we know what the offensive talent is as a minimum? We have no idea if he's going to be a facilitator, if he's going to have this well-rounded offensive game that we saw for a little blip here at the end of the year. But the offensive production enough alone is worth it for us to float an offer and see if Brooklyn is willing to match and cash that check. I have no clue, to your point, how Brooklyn feels about it. What is the dollar amount that they associate with Cam Thomas as a player? And then, by the way, it's also worth mentioning that he is still just 23 years old. He'll be 24 in October. So this is still an incredibly young player. There's no reason to think that he can't fold into your new young core. I think the hard part probably here is maybe the same way we talk about Nicholas Claxton, is that there's a world where the Nets re-sign Cam Thomas, and 2 years from now, or even a year from now, it's being talked about as salary matching for a move that they want to make, and not about, we sign this player to a contract at X value because we believe in him for this team and for what we want to accomplish. And maybe that's the bigger debate, right? Like, where do they really want to position themselves with him, even beyond how much they're willing to pay him right now? We'll get Doug's answer to that. Not now, but coming up in just one moment, and what we think will be the outcome this summer in Brooklyn. We'll do that here in just one moment. Before we do that, though, my friend's going to tell you about our other friends over at Monarch Money. I've said this to you before. I don't manage my financing well. I sometimes check my bank account and wonder, where did all the money go between dining out, online shopping, entertainment, all that great stuff? It's easy to lose track, and that's where Monarch Money comes in, your personal CFO, giving you full visibility and control over your finances. There's some surprising insights, like over on this app. When I started using it, I realized just how much I was spending on like food delivery. Super easy to drop $20 to $80 in a week on a couple of nights out, getting some easy meals. So you can take control of your finances with Monarch Money right now using promo code LOCKEDONNBA at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. That's monarchmoney.com, promo code LOCKEDONNBA for half off your first year. All right, as we tie a pretty little bow on today's Locked On Nets episode, yes, they played the Boston Celtics. Maxwell Lewis was in that game. There's a lot of things to talk about, and we're going to do that as the season winds down. But there's nothing more critical than what's going to become of Cam Thomas potentially. I mentioned there about like how far the Nets are willing to go. Do you think, and it's only opinion obviously, that the Nets are going to be willing to do, as I mentioned, Claxton, Johnson, regardless of market and other teams being interested? Do we think that like the Nets are just going to kind of give Cam Thomas a symbolic deal of, we drafted you, we want you to be successful, we want you to be a cornerstone of this team, so we'll give you the $60 million contract, even if nobody else on the market is necessarily going to sniff near that, whatever, 14 to $16 million AAV range?
No, I don't think they're giving him like, a best buds deal here. Like, I don't think that, I think I can say that pretty definitively. We would have heard more about it. Like, we would have heard more, like,
there's a world where they would have already given him a contract like that before now, right? Like, because
they had a chance to extend them before the season and they chose not to. I don't think that's that surprising. I think like we kind of knew that. I don't think we really felt like he was in that range of guys that get extended, and or there's maybe like was made an offer, but he thought it was too low and he was like, well, I'm just gonna, bet on myself here. I think that we could see a deal like that. I think if they re-sign him, okay, two things I think I can say pretty definitively. If they give him a good contract, I think the years are short. I think it's just short. Like, I think it's like 2 years, something like 2 years with a team option or something like that.
Yeah.
Like, I don't think they're going to want to go any further than that, because they're going to say, dude, we got four draft picks this year in the first round. Yeah. We've already signaled that we don't want to tie ourselves to like money that isn't like for sure going to be here or something like that. I think that like, I just don't think that they're going to do like 4 years. I think 4 years, I'd be floored. If it was 4 years, then I don't know anything. Like, we'll just say that right there. Like, and
Well,
I'm
because
comfortable.
guess what?
Go ahead.
Like, hamstring injuries are obviously a concern, whatever. But the idea, whatever the number is, just to end up being locked into any amount of money, like that's the other thing that I think has happened here too. Is it's easy to think about, well, yeah, just keep him around and see what happens. Because the last few years coming out of the superstar era, right, it's been this just murky, muddle. You go through the Mikal Bridges version of the team. So it's been very easy to be a little bit more liberal with what should they do in the short term? Well, take it easy. No, you kind of want this summer and going into the draft and going to next season to be very clear in terms of the new players you've brought in, what the core looks like. There can be holdovers. That's fine. But it has to be somewhat clearly defined, I think, for both the franchise. The fan base is obviously desperate for that as well. And I don't think you can afford to do that with Cam Thomas, to your point, and say, maybe another couple of years of maybe with Cam Thomas. That just feels like you'd be, by the way, detrimental maybe to the organization, but also to the player. Like Cam Thomas, to this point of his career, hasn't done anything to be deserving of an ambiguous 2 more seasons with Brooklyn. And I'm not saying that's on the organization necessarily, but it just is what it is. And I can see a world, I'll use your scenario. A 2-year deal gets put on the table from the Brooklyn Nets. I can see some other teams being willing to enter that conversation and say, we'll give you a 3rd-year guaranteed. At 23, going to be 24 years old, a team that says, we're going to take a swing on a 20 to 25 point scorer a night on a 3-year contract into his prime. I mean, I just pulled this up randomly in the background to think about the idea of name a team that might like the idea of having another player like this in their backcourt. And the Atlanta Hawks, who maybe are going to blow the whole thing up and get rid of Trae Young, but maybe they also just float an offer to a guy like Cam Thomas and throw him into the mix of their backcourt and create a different dynamic. Like I wouldn't be hard pressed to find, let's say, 5 or 6 teams that would give not a big contract, but maybe more years than the Nets would, or maybe a couple more $1 million than the Nets would. And that could be the Nets out in this situation. And then, by the way, it'll be the immediate point that all the Nets fans go to. If Cam Thomas is ultra successful and goes on to be a really good player, they'll say the Brooklyn Nets were unwilling to give him $14 million in an offseason. They stopped at 10. And now you're watching him be successful somewhere else. Like all of these things.
I just don't think any teams are coming. I just don't think any teams are coming in here. Like, I don't think any, like no teams have like cap flex.
If teams are going to cut, if teams were going to make offers, what do you think that like the highest number that you could see any team offering him? Let's say it's a 3-year deal that a team's going to come in and offer. Like, you think the max is $12 million a year?
Yeah. Something like that.
Okay.
Yeah, probably.
Yeah. And at that point, maybe Cam Thomas feels just as comfortable to stay with Brooklyn, right? The place where he has been. And
I think they're going to say, like, go out and tell us what the market is. Go see, go tell us, like, go out there and see if who's willing to. Now, it's like a little weird with these offer sheets because when you put them out there, you get the reason they don't happen a lot. This kind of screws the restricted free agents too, is that you have to like sit and wait then. And then free agency passes you by. And then if you don't take, the guy doesn't take it, you're kind of left holding the bag. And so like, there's another reason to not really, like it just,
floated out there to try to screw another team over and end up screwing
it screws the players. It's like restricted free agency, but it's kind of like what your team wants to play unless you're awesome. Like unless the team just totally screwed up and you got all the way to restricted free agency and the guy's like, it turns out to be like awesome. Yeah. But otherwise, most times you kind of just have to take what your team gets you because just the mechanics of it don't make sense. The mechanics mean the team has to put the offer in there and then wait. And then all other free agents kind of make their decisions and you're kind of like, all right, well, they didn't take it. It's like, well, now we can't do anything. So it's another reason that they don't want to do it. So you add that with the fact that none of these teams have any salary cap to like go for it. They're not going to pair. I don't think they're like Trae Young and Cam Thomas are any pair. They're going to be the worst defensive backcourt in the history of basketball.
No. Listen, like I'm just following history with the Atlanta Hawks here. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like,
so anyway, so like, I just think that like, there's just not going to be a market for him. And I think the Nets maybe like do a good guy deal here with like front loading some money for next year and like pay him a little bit more up front, but not tie themselves to like longer term, maybe a team option at the end so they can get out of it if they want to. Or they can like put it through to have it match salaries later. You know what I mean? Like their team can know that they can make it go. I think that like, that's what we're going to see like 2 years in a team option and it's going to be lower than people think. And I have a question for you. Actually, go ahead. Cause I have a higher level question I want to ask you. I'm actually going to put out to the fan base here shortly, but I was just thinking about it.
Yeah, the one thing was I was thinking about how if the Nets do that, the short term, okay, we give you a reasonable more than the minimum that we could give you, but not something that's going to necessarily hamstring us. The nice part about it for Brooklyn is you can kind of fold him into your rookie class in that way. Still just 23 years old. You can say, okay, now you're on the same timeline ish, and over the next couple of seasons, if we think it's worth it to pay you up again, then we can re-up with you at a larger number. The one question I was going to ask to the fan base is name the teams that you think would come in for Cam Thomas this summer and actually give an offer of some significance. Could be a fun conversation there, but
they're not going to. That's actually wasn't the conversation. I actually don't think that's that fun because I just don't think there are any. Now, I'm not trying to be a huge Debbie Downer for your question.
It's fun for the fans.
Well, what I'm saying is, sorry, I know I'm S-ing on your point here, but they're just not going to find any teams. None of these teams have cap space. So
well,
boys,
it's you know the job, and ladies, you know the job. Go find me teams that Cam Thomas could be a suitable a match for there. But what was your question?
Let me ask you this question. Okay, rank these players in confidence that they are going to be on the team next year. Ready?
Okay.
D'Angelo Russell, Cam Thomas, Day'Ron Sharpe, Zaire Williams, Trendon Watford. That's it. Those five. So D'Lo, Cam, Day'Ron, Zaire, Watford. Rank them in order of how confident. This is what I'm going to put out. How confident you are that these players are in a uniform next year. Don't worry about the contract. Don't worry about the contract numbers.
I'm going to go with I don't want to filibuster here. I'm going to go with.
It's hard, right?
It is. There's one at the top here that I'm trying to figure out for myself.
Well, actually, hold on. Vamp for 2 seconds about your process. Well, I'm going to write mine down here.
Okay, because there's the reason why it's a little bit tricky for me is it's about veterans, certainly, when we think about D'Lo and whether or not they value him and what he's brought to the table and where they want to go. And then it's also about another year from now, where do I think these players could be as you bring in your rookie class? Guys can help complement other players on your roster, and then let alone price point. So I'm going to go with, for everything we talked about today, I'm going to put Thomas first. I'm putting Williams second because I think he's the kind of player that you keep around because he probably fits well around a team as it gets better. He's a nice complementary piece, defensive piece as well. I'll put, and then I'm going to, she's so stupid. I'm going to put Sharpe, then Watford, then D'Lo. Yeah.
Wow. Wait, so
and I was between putting Watford above Sharpe.
Real quick, just read it fast. Cam, Zaire, what was it?
Thomas, Williams, Watford, Sharpe, D'Lo.
Watford, Sharpe, D'Lo. Wow, it's funny. Okay, so I went almost the same except one major difference. I had the same. That's okay. I said D'Lo first.
Which, by the way, and this is probably the point of this exercise. D'Lo is listed last, and there was a world where I thought about putting him second. You know what I mean? He's the last person I list, but I think, and so much this depends on what happens in this draft, maybe, and how they perceive what they're going to do when they get to the draft. But D'Lo probably should. I think you're right in putting D'Lo at the top, near the top, if not at the top of the list.
I have D'Lo first, Cam second, Zaire third, Day'Ron fourth, and Trendon Watford fifth.
Yeah, and I said that wrong. I Sharpe above Watford. I was debating that. Yeah, so we're right there.
So we're the same. That's funny. We're the same list, except we swapped the 1 and the 5. That's wild. But that speaks to the uncertainty about sort of what's happening here. Because I could see D'Lo going on a 1 year. A 1 year proven contract or something like that, and the Nets because we've heard the Nets liking that idea, right? Liking that idea more than Cam Thomas. I don't know. It's wild, man.
And by the way, so I'm going to do the real quick here. We'll use your list, putting D'Lo at the top. So D'Lo, Thomas, Williams, Sharpe, and then Watford, right? So we're really close on this anyway. And the big thing here for me is the top 2 guys that we're talking about, D'Angelo Russell and Cam Thomas. What's the conversation? It's about, because is there really a market for them? That's the same conversation for both those players. One veteran point guard that, has bounced around so much. We believe he has a skill set, a talent, and a fit. The other one is young, injuries, etc. Both those guys, maybe one of the reasons why I'm confident they'll be back is because I don't think anybody else is banging down their door to this whole point of this discussion. Is anyone banging down D'Angelo Russell's door to give him a big deal? Does he like the short term and maybe resetting his market? Sure. Same thing for Thomas security, right? So some of that I think plays a factor in it, but it'll be interesting. And man, talk about Trendon Watford, a guy that we really liked when they brought him in. 2 seasons later, we're like, yeah, I don't know. I mean, he'll probably just end up on the market and somebody will pick him up. But that's the nature of taking all these swings on these young players, as we've talked about.
Yeah, he's played good. And by the way, I will do a whole episode on Zaire Williams. Zaire Williams, this is a tease for later on this week.
Yeah,
he has since January 1st. He's the best shooting Nets best 3-point shooter. Like since in the year of our Lord 2025.
My list almost started with Zaire Williams. So I thought it'd be too bold to put him as number one. But I thought
mine too. But
type of player, the mold of player. We always talk about the skill set, size, defensive value. Like he's the only guy on this list that checks all of those boxes in that way, especially with the 3-point shot coming around a little bit here.
Yeah, 37% since January 1st, number one on the team. Okay, good episode. We're gonna not good for Cam Thomas. It's a huge bummer.
Not a good episode, but great episode. That's just me, but that's how I talk about it.
Buddy, you couldn't have said it better myself. Okay, we're going to get out of here. Make sure you subscribe to Locked On Nets over on YouTube. Make sure you subscribe wherever you listen to the podcast.
Yeah. Listen, it can be a very strange place in life. I tried to show up as best I could, and I tried not to be cynical. And that is one Lily Taylor.
Oh, one of the all-time. Wait a second. Is that from Home Improvement?
No, that's Patricia Richard. That's who you thinking about.
I thought that was the Tool Man's wife. Tim the Tool Man Taylor's wife.
Tim the Tool Man Taylor.
Who's Lily Taylor? Who is that?
I'm gonna say an actress. We don't need to get too far in the weeds.
I mean, one of the things.
She's been in a lot of good stuff. Actually, I'm looking at her picture right now. Listen, stay tuned next episode because I'll remind everybody she's great. But we don't go a mile deep on who the quotes are coming from.
Well, once it wasn't the Tool Man's wife, I stopped caring. Okay, one of the all-time great poets. We'll be back again tomorrow talking more Brooklyn Nets basketball.
Basketball. Yeah.